All right? It's human nature. That's what we do. That's how humans progress in society. I just mentioned how all societies have gone through that cycle. All right? It's not that they're evil up in Washington. It's that they've been given this power. We've ceded this power. It's time to take it back. That's all it's about. What's the solution to the problem? That people have to reclaim their liberty, self-governing. Going back to those principles. All right, we've shifted from those principles. Those principles created the greatest nation on earth. All we have to do is go back to those principles. And that's what Convention of States is all about. That's what it's all about. American, why did I put that word in there? What did other nations around the world call the United States right after the Constitution was ratified? What even did the colonies call this new form of government? What did they call it? It was the Great American Experiment. The Great American Experiment. When did we stop being an experiment? It's my submission to you that we have never stopped being an experiment. All right? We've never stopped being an experiment. We are still today the Great American Experiment. All right? We've shifted. We've had problems. We've shifted from those principles. We're still the American experiment, and we can still bring it back to those principles. We are the Great American Experiment that has succeeded above and beyond imagination. The process Convention of States, again mentioned in this, I think we covered that earlier, so we're good on that. Why did I include this picture? That top document there, that's the Constitution. It's the whole thing. You can read it. In fact, I'm reading it currently for my American government class. I sat down one evening. I read through half the thing. You can understand it. It's a piece of cake to understand. What's the big book underneath? That's all the other rules created by the judicial branch, created by the executive agencies. It takes up a massive amount of pages. We don't need any of that. We don't need any of that. We just need the Constitution. Question in the back.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I ask you to go back one frame?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Get those principles there?
Yeah.
Perfect. Grab a picture by all means. And again, we can talk about this, the specifics of that. All right, I'll wrap up here. One final quote. I hope it's on this one. So these are some of my favorite quotes. Freedom is never more than one generation away. It's our responsibility. Self-government. The greatest test of a moral society is the type of world it leaves to its children. That hit me right here when I read that. Man, that's serious. He means that. All right, and that's our responsibility, especially in America, because of the principles which we were founded upon, the self-government. Right, that's our responsibility. We're not here to limit the feds. We're here to preserve our rights and our nations, because if we don't, if I don't, nobody will. All right, that's my responsibility. I've said I was going to finish here for quite a while, and I will try to do that. I don't know, I guess I just like talking. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, this is an excerpt from Patrick Henry's speech. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with such a formidable adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be next week, or will it be next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and the British Guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Sir, we're not weak. If we make a proper use of the means which God of nature hath placed in our power, 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty and in such a country as that which we possess are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we're not fighting alone. There's a just God who presides over the destinies of nations. Man, that fits perfectly today. That fits perfectly today. And with that, I'll sum it up. It's back to those principles. Back to the fundamentals which we are founded upon. That's what Convention of States is all about. Convention of States is one of those principles for us as the people to change that American experiment back to the principles which have provided for our prospering. That's what it's all about. That's why I do it. That's why I love going around and talking to groups like this. And that's why all of the people I know who support Convention of States are in this cause. It's because of that reason. I hope I've clarified all these things for you. And again, if you have any questions, must be out of battery. If you have any questions, yeah, I'll go like this. Please, by all means, ask, and we will answer those. So with that, that's about all I have to say. Thank you so much again for coming out this evening. I don't know if this is in my jurisdiction, but Kevin Jones has taken time to join us tonight. And for me, I really appreciate that from Convention of States. So if you wouldn't mind giving him a round of applause.
My name's Dave Schneider. I'm Regional Director for Convention Estates, and he just went through a lot of information. So I'm here as somebody that can help with maybe some questions that might be out there. As far as this process is concerned, where we are in the nation, I know he kind of talked about some states that have already passed it. He also mentioned I do this in several different states, so I get around to some other legislatures and work with guys like Kevin and talk with legislators on a regular basis about this and trying to educate them on this process. He also did mention that we had a vote, it was 2 sessions ago, and in the House. And Kansas is unique in the process because it's hardwired into our Kansas Constitution, this whole process that we have to go through. It mentions Article 5 of the United States Constitution and our Kansas Constitution. It says that we have to pass it by a 2/3 majority. We're the only state in the union that has that in our Constitution, so it's a little different than every other state. So we didn't quite pass. We had a vote of 77-47 in favor on the House floor, and that's not quite enough. We need 84, I believe, is the magic number. So we were close, but we didn't get it done. We're going to be introducing this legislation again, and we're going to be we're out here trying to educate the grassroots. That's the big reason we're here today. So we're here to answer questions about this process, and hopefully there's some questions. No questions? Yeah.
When you go to each of the states, I guess my question is it the bill, or to have the petition for the state, is it like a bill where it's got to go through the House and the Senate and the governor has to sign? Or is it just the legislature has to agree to it? That's it?
It's a great question. According to the United States Constitution, it says on the application of the several state legislators. So by that rule, it's a resolution that needs to be passed through. It's a joint resolution, so it has to be by the House and the Senate in 34 states. Unless you're in Nebraska, they only have one chamber, a unicameral out there. So they call themselves senators. It's not officially a Senate, but whatever. What other questions are out there? There's fears about this process. What kind of fears might be out there? Have anybody heard anything that's scary about this process?
Sure. I don't have fear about it, but my question goes along that line. What kind of resistance?
Yeah, it's that fear factor. There's a long history, and I say long, it goes back to the 1950s. Up until that point, there was never really fear that was widespread, at least, about going through this process. Well, we've done a lot of research, and where that fear is originated is essentially there were some movements being kicked off in America to try to call a convention of states. And for the big one at that point was reapportionment. So Kansas actually passed an application for a reapportionment after the Supreme Court said that our state Senate could no longer represent counties. They had to represent people, much like the House of Representatives does already. But that was a landmark Supreme Court case, and it made the states very mad. So a lot of states passed applications to hold a convention of states to address reapportionment. And that wasn't the first time the states have kind of looked at trying to overturn Supreme Court cases, but it was the first time that I would say that the progressives really took note of this process that could overturn the progressive decisions from the Supreme Court. And they started saying those things that you might hear that's kind of prevalent now, that this could run away and rewrite our Constitution, and some conservatives took hold of that argument and really started spreading it around at that point. And it kind of went away. Reapportionment, the idea of going to hold a convention or passing an amendment for reapportionment kind of went away, although there's several states still with that active call for a convention. If they ever got to 34, which I think they're out at 12, they would have one. So that died down, and then 1970s happened, right? So we had another landmark case called Roe v. Wade. So same thing happened. States are very upset. They started calling again for a convention of states for another amendment called the Right to Life Amendment. They got all the way up to 19 states calling for a convention of states to happen on a Right to Life Amendment when the same thing happened from the progressives. We had Chief Warren Burger. He sent this nice letter to a wonderful lady. I hold a lot of respect. She died a year ago. Phyllis Schlafly, saying that you can't go through this process because it's going to do away with the Constitution, it's because it's going to run away, and you never know what the outcome is going to be. She took it to heart. She utilized her platform with the Eagle Forum and spread it all through the conservative movement, and it died instantly. 19 states is the furthest they got. And to think, we could have gotten to a convention of states for a right to life. In my opinion, I'm definitely in favor of something like that. So I think that's kind of a travesty that we haven't had that. Congress certainly hasn't proposed that amendment out. I think the states probably could have. So that stopped that movement in the past. We're seeing the same thing happen to us in the last month. Okay, we've passed 12 states now with the Convention of States project, asking for limits on the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government, term limits on federal officials, and fiscal restraints on the federal government. And the same thing's happening. Progressives have taken note. They've signed a letter, a memo of understanding between 230 organizations. They're the most leftist-leaning, Soros-backed groups in America. If you named an organization that you probably are not real happy with, they're on this list of 230 organizations, and to my knowledge, it's the only time they've ever done this, where they've all come together and said that they oppose something. They did for a Convention of States project, okay? And soon after that, we had this individual that's going around on a book tour, just recently, all summer long, something about what happened, I think is the name of her book. Not asked the question in her interview, gave this odd statement about a convention of states and said it's the worst thing that could ever happen to America. It's a right-wing conspiracy funded by the Koch brothers, and it's an attempt to strengthen the Second Amendment and do away with your First Amendment rights. So that's the fear process. Now, she did it again a week later on film. I could play the video. And then the strangest thing happened. 2 days later, Howard Dean said the exact same thing. So it's happening just like it has happened the last 4 times in American history. They're trying to stop this process, and we're out here spreading the good word, the good news about it. Unfortunately, there are conservatives that still hold on to this belief that this process could run away, right? We got to think about this runaway process, because we'll just get it out there. So let's think about the math. 38 states have to ratify anything. We're going to go all the way to the end. 38 states have to ratify anything before it becomes a part of this Constitution, right? Is what the Article 5 actually says. Flip that math on its head. There's 50 states. How many states can block anything? 13. 13 out of 50 can block anything. So you talk about Second Amendment. That's the one I always hear, right? You're going to do, we're going to go through this process, and they're going to strip away our Second Amendment rights. Okay, no. To believe that, you're going to have to believe that more than 13 states are actually, 38 states are going to go along with that, but 13 states aren't going to stop it. So those 13 states, you got to believe that Kansas, for one, is going to sign. States like Oklahoma, Texas, you want to start in the South, you want to go with Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana. You want to go in the West, you want to talk about Montana, you want to talk about North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa even. You want to go to the North, we can talk about Minnesota. It's a crazy state.
Michigan.
It's a crazy state, but I'm telling you, they hunt in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. We got Tennessee. You can start naming these states. It's never going to happen. So here's a huge advantage of a convention of states. Because Congress, anytime that they want, can propose an amendment, yet we don't fear this process coming from Congress. It says whenever Congress shall want, or get the whim, they can propose an amendment to the United States Constitution. But the states, for some reason, we fear this process from the states. And we shouldn't, because think about it. California, when they go to this convention, has 1 vote. Montana has 1 vote. Okay, in Congress, how many congressmen does California have? They have 50.
More than they have citizens.
They have 50 reps. They have 50 congressmen sitting, 53 actually, 53 congressmen sitting there. Montana has 1. South Dakota has 1. Wyoming has 1. North Dakota has 1. Okay, so it equalizes the playing field with all those small states in the convention of states. Because again, each of those states are sovereign. This is a convention of states. That states part is very important. It's not a convention of delegates or a convention of the people, per se. It's a convention of the states. So the states each get one vote, no matter how many people they bring to this particular meeting. There has been some history. Tennessee tried to bring 100 people to the peace conference in 1860s, right before the Civil War. They had 100 delegates there, but they only had one vote. Okay? So it doesn't matter how many people they bring, one vote per state. All right, so, yeah.
Well, I know that Kevin's been working with it, and Karen, but
Yeah.
the rules around it, there's something that you
Yep.
have to have all the rules.
Yeah, it's been debated and talked about. Yeah, so the problem is it's been over 100 years since the states have actually held any sort of convention. Okay, so the rules were known to the founding fathers inherently. Just like they didn't write in a lot of different things in the Constitution, they didn't write the rules into the Constitution because they knew them. It was probably the people sitting in Philadelphia had already, you mentioned 4 different conventions that they had already sat in. The rules were always the same. It's very similar, right? There's very minute changes in each one of them. But they didn't write it out, but we've done the research. We've gone back and looked at all those conventions that are almost identical, almost every one of them. And we actually held a simulated Article 5 convention last year under those same exact rules. And it's amazing to watch the process. You know, it's amazing. So, yeah, they've been a part. You attended one event, or 2 events, right?
I attended all except the last one.
The last one, okay. And they were trying to hammer out some rules and trying to get them together. Now, keep in mind, when the convention convenes, they adopt whatever rules that they want. There's nothing in stone that says that that is the rules. But 34 states have to make a call for the convention. So they just kind of set the rules. They set the parameters. They set the topic. You know, they have a super majority, so they're going to kind of rule the day with 34 states, if you think it that way. They're going to have, okay, this is germane, this is not germane, because this is what we got sent here to do under this subject matter. What are the questions? Yeah.
As a legislator and as a person who talks on convention of states, one of the questions I get faced with, especially with people I would think are solid, really support this, is they say, well, nullification.
Sure.
So, can you speak to nullification just for a second? Because what's going to happen is after you leave here, is you start talking about it, something's going to go nullification.
Yeah. Okay, so nullification is the thought process that, an individual state on its own can basically say something's unconstitutional. And that's not, you don't find it anywhere in the Constitution, other than you can derive some inherited power through the 10th Amendment. And now keep in mind, the Supreme Court has said the states can't do that. Okay? Now, no matter what you think or what you believe, the Supreme Court has ruled on this at least 3 or 4 different times. That the states really can't, they have no power under this. There are ways that the states can try to stall things and get in the way of the federal government when they've overstepped their bounds. But there is no official process in the Constitution to go through a nullification type situation. Okay, so when you get approached or get talked to about nullification, you got to remember that. It's extra constitutional. It means it's not in the Constitution at all. It's a right derived outside of the Constitution that's left to the states. But again, the Supreme Court has already ruled on that. Some would say, well, who cares what the Supreme Court says? Well, that's the same thing Arkansas said when they didn't integrate their schools. What happened? Right? So they tried to step in the way of the federal government. They brought in the military, essentially, and they force integrated those schools. Now, was that the right thing to do? Probably. I mean, they probably should integrate the schools as a civil rights issue. But the fact is, that's what you're facing. You're going down that road. And how many things can you so-called step in the way of the federal government on? Is it one here, one there, or do you massively do it? But essentially what happens is what led up to the Civil War. They eventually got secession. It's that road to that path. they tried to actually convene a convention before the Civil War. They called it the Peace Conference, I mentioned just a minute ago. They actually got together in a convention, but they didn't call it under Article 5. All the states attended, even the ones that had seceded. And this is right after Lincoln was inaugurated, right? All the states attended, including Kansas. We were brand new. We rushed our delegates out to Washington, D.C., and they got sat late, but they got there. Again, one state, one vote. So the new state got a vote as well. And they hammered out an amendment to the United States Constitution. Tyler was the presiding president of that body. Lincoln was upstairs monitoring, but he had no vote. He couldn't do anything. He was getting word and correspondence of what was going on. But it was at the a hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. And they hammered out this amendment, trying to solve the problem that these couple of states had already seceded by this point, and they were at a constitutional crisis. So they got this amendment, and they all passed it out, and unfortunately, because they didn't use Article 5 of the United States Constitution to call that convention, they had no power. They couldn't go back to the states and say, okay, we're going to amend the Constitution. They couldn't do it. So they had to give it to Congress to make the proposal, and Congress sat on it. And a couple of months later, we broke out in war, essentially, at that point. So Madison wrote extensively on this. In 1831, there's 2 letters he wrote. They were wonderful, Ever and Tryst letter. And he dealt with nullification and the Convention of States in 1 letter, in 2 letters actually, in 2 different times. He said, no, you got to use everything in the Constitution first, including if everything in the Constitution doesn't work and you get all the way down to the Article 5 Convention of States, do that. And if that doesn't work, you still have the extra constitutional stuff that ultimately leads to armed resistance. So he spells it out specifically. He's the father of the Constitution, author of the Bill of Rights. I take his word at it.
Right. Another point on that. I asked, when they had the simulated convention, they had that meeting over in Gardner that Bob was telling you about. And the lead delegate from Kansas, can't remember his name, really neat guy to talk to.
Bill Sutton.
Yes, Bill Sutton. I talked to him. He's a hilarious guy. Gotta love him. He's got a lot of knowledge. He was the lead delegate. I asked him, why can't we use nullification? I said, why don't we just use nullification? That's what I've been told. And here's what he said, and correct me if I'm wrong. He said, we tried it in Kansas. All right, we tried it, and I can't remember which specific avenue of the government it was, but he said, all of the businesses in that area of the economy came to us and said, no, you can't nullify this, because if you nullify this, the federal government is going to destroy our businesses. We're done. All right, it might sound good for you as a legislator to nullify this, but as soon as you do, the federal government's going to come after us. So that was his reasoning. I just thought I'd toss it in. I don't know if that goes along with what you said.
Well, yeah, it definitely does. And they'll use any way to make you comply.
Right.
You see states, and it can be used on either side. Progressives can use nullification just as well as conservatives can. You're starting to see some of it right now that we have another administration. They're utilizing, all of a sudden they want to talk about federalism, right? That's the first time I've ever heard progressives talk about federalism.